Good morning or afternoon, everyone. How's everyone doing? Awesome. Thank you so much for coming to this discussion. We are really excited to share a big set of ideas on what is a pretty complex topic. We have been sharing our anxiety about the time constraints we have for this session, which really are going to put a limitation on how far we can get into this. But the good news is we've got all sorts of ways to continue the discussion afterwards. So we're going to dive in and are, again, just really excited that you're here. By way of introduction to this topic, I'll just say that if I could start Teach for America over again, I would do hundreds of things differently, but the most important thing I would do differently relates to this session. The number one thing I would do is put at the very heart of this work in each of the communities in which we operate an effort to define and evolve and reflect upon what we at Teach for All have come to call collective contextualized visions. The moment this notion first really kind of took hold of me was actually just a couple of years ago, actually, when I took a long trip around parts of rural America where we had been placing teachers for many years, and in particular in the Mississippi Delta. I visited communities where, in the minds of the community members we were talking with, Teach for America had made just an extraordinary difference. Heard from people who said it's completely changed the expectations we in our community have of our kids. And then I visited other communities, not, that far from those communities, where I saw that our impact could have just been so much greater. In one community I visited, I met with very respected community leaders who were deeply worried about their children leaving the community and never coming back. And then I met students who were just absolutely determined to go to college and said that they really wanted to come back to their community, but they didn't have any hope that that would make sense because they couldn't figure out, they had no sense of agency at all about, kind of what they would do in their community or how they would go about making their communities stronger. And I wondered, what if our teachers were working towards, among other things, building their students' sense of agency to improve their communities. Meanwhile, I would visit the core members and alumni teaching in that community who were teaching towards wildly different things. I met one incredible core member who was absolutely determined and incredibly successful at getting all of his kids, like 120 out of 100, something like 60 students in his entire high school into colleges, only to be really disappointed and kind of revisiting his approach in his second year when he realized that so many of them had dropped out with significant debt. Right down the hall from him was another teacher who was absolutely determined not to put her kids on a path to college because as someone from a low-income background, she was sure that that was the path to lots of debt. These core members seemed to be friends with each other, but they weren't talking with each other, as far as I could gather, about what they were working towards for their kids. And meanwhile, the very hardworking staff of Teach for America wasn't talking to them about the ultimate ends they were working towards at all, but rather were obsessed with helping them teach their subjects better. I left that visit just thinking, what if we were welcoming our core members into a vision for the ultimate outcomes that we're working towards for our kids, that we had developed and evolved over time so that it reflected and reconciled many different factors, our own personal values like those individual core members were bringing to their work, our understanding, our global understanding about what the world requires, and hugely importantly, the values and aspirations of our students, their parents, and respected community leaders. The challenges facing kids growing up in that particular community, and the local pathways to opportunity, the actual pathways to opportunity for kids in that community. Imagine if we exposed our incoming core members to the vision that best integrated all of these elements and all the inputs that generated them, helping them meet the community leaders and the kids in the communities and really come to understand the history and the assets of their communities. And then welcome them, ask them to start in teaching towards these visions that are reflective of all of this, and welcome them into an ongoing communal process that would engage core members, alumni, allies, to evolve and reflect on what more we can do to reach those visions. Now, why is this the number one thing I would do differently? 3 reasons just quickly before I get to a brilliant panel to hopefully bring this more to life. 1, I think it would lead us to have such greater impact on kids because it would ensure that we're working towards the most important ends possible, given that we'd be thinking about not only our own convictions, but so much else in figuring out what to aim at. Secondly, it would enable us to be true community partners. I don't think that we lack a conceptual commitment to community partnership at Teach for America. For years and years and years, I've heard so many people vocalize a commitment to that, but I think we lack an understanding of what that looks like. And I've come to believe that co-creating with our communities the ends that we're working towards is maybe the most foundational piece of true partnership. And finally, I think it would foster much greater collective impact through embedding capacity for reflection into our community, through convening constant discussions about what more we can do, initially in our classrooms and ultimately as involving our alumni and whole community discussions. What more can we do ultimately in our communities in order to realize these visions for the outcomes we're working towards? So we've brought together a, I believe, brilliant panel today that aims to build understanding about why we must act to orient our work around a contextualized vision, about how to do it, about what it would mean for our teaching and our work. And we've aimed to make this relevant whether you're a teacher working from some other capacity in education or in our communities, or are a member of Teach for America's staff. So with that introduction, let's start in with kind of the why of this. And I'm gonna ask Jonathan to dive us into this. Jonathan is starting a school in New Orleans that he will tell you more about. He won Teach for America's Social Innovation Award last year. He's an Echoing Green Fellow. But by way of introduction, Jonathan, can you share with us a bit about your background and kind of what you were bringing to Teach for America?
Yes, thank you, Wendy, and good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Thank you. Great photo. This was taken on what I would say is probably the happiest day of my life. This was a picture of me at my college graduation in 2010, and I think this is a Polaroid or something taken by my dad. And this moment for me was so important because on this day I became the first person in my family to graduate college, which is to some extent the biggest aim that I was always pushing for my students to get to. I come from a family where, parents lived paycheck to paycheck, moved around a lot because we couldn't afford, where we were staying. Sometime there was a period of time where we didn't have a place to stay. I grew up in a house where, in spite of the love that my parents showed toward me and my sisters, and the great teachings that we got from them, I would watch my older sister make some very interesting life decisions, early teen pregnancy or deciding not to go to college and the impact that had on her economically and in terms of future options. And so, this is the world that I come to Chapman with and Chapman University. And my world gets shifted when, I find out I have to pay my way through this very expensive private university. I'm like, what do you mean? My mother tells me that I have to take care of it, that her and my father can't afford to. I'm like, but I've done everything that you told me to get to this point. What do you mean I now have to figure this out, and if I can't, I have to go back home? So I go through this path of negotiating with senior administrators there and trying to get really just be a standout so that they will make any and all cuts and opportunities for me to stay. Long story short, I do very well, become student body president, and I get to a point where I'm graduating and I'm like, what do I do with my life? I want to do something with my life that certainly gets me paid. I got a lot of loans to pay back, but want to do something that allows me to give back to students whose story is very similar to mine. And so I joined Teach for America and get placed in Greater New Orleans at one of the flagship KIPP schools there, KIPP Central City Academy. I obviously have an incredible first year of teaching, but something happens my second year that frames a lot of the work that I do now. In my second year of teaching, I come across a young man named Ricky Summers, who by the time he got to me in 8th grade had effectively closed a 4-year achievement gap in reading and math through the great team of teachers that we had, right? Ricky worked really hard because he wanted to be the first in his family to go to college, and not just go, but graduate. I get a call spring of my second year of teaching where someone says, hey, Mr. Johnson, don't know if you know this, but Ricky sold drugs outside of school to support his family. I go, no, I did not know that. I'm like, that's not good. I'm like, yeah, and we're also sad to say that, this past weekend during one of these drug deals, Ricky was murdered. And obviously my heart sank, and I don't know, for those of you in this room who have ever had to encounter losing a student, it's a strange feeling of guilt, of frustration, obviously sadness, and confusion. And to top this all off, at his funeral, they read the results of his state testing and explore testing. And they're able to predict that he was on track to receive full tuition to any state university in Louisiana based off of what we call a TOPS scholarship. And so had he lived, he would potentially would have been on track to graduate university. And so obviously I'm heartbroken. And in my grieving, I go through this process that is very catalytic for me of, here's a kid who was taught by some of the best teachers in the country in one of the best school models that our country has produced in the past 20 plus years, all in the pursuit of going to college. Yet none of this is enough to help him address the real material conditions of poverty that he is embattled with every day. How do we build a school, I start thinking, to do that? How do we build a school that can literally beat the streets in the fight for these students' lives? These students that Tupac Shakur calls the concrete, or from the concrete. And so fast track to 2 years later, or going through 2 years of just frustration, of being a good teacher, or good as it was defined by the movement that I'm a part of, but ultimately feeling like I wasn't preparing students for the world of work, or to be successful for the world of work that they would ultimately enter. And I approached a mentor of mine. His name is Matt Candler. He's the founder, CEO of 4.0 Schools. Some of you may know that organization. And I go, Matt, I'm having like a career crisis. And long story short, I joined a program, a partnership program that aims to rethink public school design in New Orleans. And the concept is fairly simple to start. And the concept was, how do we take kids like Ricky and get them to the highest paying jobs sooner? That is the question that I was trying to figure out. And if it meant circumventing the need for college, cool. Like we just need to get them money. There was this fascination that I had, or this belief that, what happened to Ricky is not happening 10 minutes on the other side of New Orleans in Audubon Park, where the average home is about $1 million. In those neighborhoods, what happened to Ricky does not happen. And so there has to be some correlation between the amount of money that Ricky and his family is bringing in and the community that he's a part of, and this abnormal violence. And so I attempt to build a school that addresses this, and it's gotten to a point now, and I'll sort of close with this, it is a school that ultimately aims to achieve financial freedom for students. Our goal is that we want our students to experience the comforts that a middle-class life would afford. And so we essentially partner with companies in the highest growing, highest paying industries, local industries in New Orleans and beyond. And we create schools, micro schools, that are feeders then to those companies. And the sort of innovation of it is in the fact that we go directly, we treat it as more of a boutique model where we go directly to these companies and ask what we should teach our students to better serve their companies and industries' needs, as opposed to what typical models do, which is ask these industries to fit within the constraints of what schools are doing. And so through this process, we're able to more quickly get students like Ricky ready for very meaningful employment, which the federal government defines as whatever the median salary is for any given region. And so we're piloting at the moment, and our students are making a part-time wage that is equivalent to what the median salary is in Louisiana, which is about $30,000. And after about 1 year, we have juniors and seniors who are on track for this type of employment opportunity right after high school. And so my thinking is, how do we reimagine what outcome we are ultimately striving students toward that ultimately allow them to transform their communities as we know them?
So Jonathan kind of expertly ran through my many questions for him. And I just think in listening to his story about how he started teaching in a school that was working to put kids on a path to meaningfully different outcomes through getting them through college, he sort of came to see that that wasn't sufficient given the actual local context, and also that there were other possible pathways given the opportunities in this region in the tech sector, as I understand it. And I guess what that leads me to think about, and I wonder, I think it'd be great for all of us to reflect on like just whether we know enough often about the local challenges, about the local pathways to opportunity, about the local aspirations to be confident that the visions we're working towards will be transformational for our kids. It brings me back, I'm just going to share one little other example from my own journey in this, to a visit I made to a school in a community, a very hard-pressed community. It's an incredible school that a bunch of Teach for America people started many moons ago. I mean, I don't even want to think it would date me so much, but they built a school that, they welcomed me into the school with such kind of, in so many ways, well-deserved pride. I mean, they've built a school that they want to send their own kids to. There is a sense of community, a sense of family. The parents are every bit a part of it. And I asked them if we could bring the parents and the kids into a discussion with the teachers to explore this question, like, really, what are you hoping for your kids? And what are you hoping this school will do for you? And we had this discussion that was very intense, where the kids and their moms were articulating essentially that in this community context similar to that of New Orleans, actually, where the kind of violence and conditions of the local community were such that they felt such urgency to get their kids, in their minds, through college so that they could get well-paying jobs and get the whole family out of that community. I mean, that's what they were articulating with great passion. And the parents and the students left, and I asked the faculty what they thought. And I'd looked at the college rates, and this school was doing much better than the surrounding schools, but it wasn't doing radically well. The teachers at the beginning of the conversation felt so confident. This is a school, we work in deep partnership with our parents. They're ever present, they're everywhere. We love them, they love us. Like, we can have this discussion, but we're not gonna learn that much from it. They were so shaken by this discussion. Like, they did learn so much from it. And their conclusion was, we gotta take this college thing much more seriously. That and many other experiences since have just, and listening to Jonathan's example in particular, I just find, I mean, they really strike me at the core, like, are we doing enough? Like, we're all here because we want to put our kids on a meaningfully different path, and we have our ideas about what that takes, but are we rooted enough in understanding really the community context in order to be sure that we're working towards the ends that will produce that ultimate outcome? Okay, without further ado, let's talk a bit about the how. Let's see where we are with slides here.
I think I messed it up.
That's okay, we'll skip a couple of these. So to get us into the how, it is my pleasure to turn this over to, you can maybe get it to the right slide, to Nadine, who is the founder of CoIET, which is Creole for Teach for Haiti. She is centering everything around a collective contextualized vision from the start. And I want to ask you, Nadine, to just say a bit about your background and how you came to found CoIET, just by way of introduction.
Sure. Thanks, Wendy. Good afternoon. And I want a huge kudos to Wendy for pronouncing it in Creole. Thank you.
Or attempting to.
You do it well. So I'm really pleased to be here and grateful that I have a chance to share a bit about CoIET and our movement that's afoot in Haiti. I'll start by saying I am a proud daughter of Haiti. I was born there, started my schooling in the country, and immigrated to the US to finish school, continued on to college, university. But I am so grateful and so blessed to have had parents who said the most important thing for their kids, their 3 children, was to remember where we came from. And that in itself was revolutionary, because so often immigrants get cut off for many reasons, with all the best intentions from where they come from. But that was not the case in our household. And I'm so grateful that that put me on a path to always questioning where I'd come from and pushing for a deep understanding of my roots. That also included me traveling back and forth to Haiti with my father in particular, who was a school teacher and a school director in rural Haiti. And while traveling back and forth, I had the privilege of getting to know my peers. These were kids 11, 12, 13 years old who also loved school. But I quickly realized that their trajectories were different, specifically because they were living in an environment or in an area where often they would have to finish school at 6th grade, the equivalent of 6th grade here in the US. Currently, only about 30% of kids are finishing successfully all the way through primary school, which is 6th grade in Haiti. And I remember turning to my father, being about 12 years old, and saying, why? And that was the first time that I could remember that he didn't have an answer for me. And I was deeply troubled. And I struggled to understand when it had become good enough for a quality education to be reserved for the privileged few. That was either if you're a wealthy Haitian, or maybe in the context here in the US, if you were born in a particular zip code. And so I think ever since then, I've been pushing for the answer to that question, to that why. And I'm grateful that I had a chance to go on and study the history of education in Haiti as an undergraduate. I then went on and worked actually with a great team of Achievement First, and then studied international education policy as a master's student. But always, always with my sight set back on home, and set on returning home to join with other changemakers who believed that there was not one single story about Haiti. That so often you hear about one story, but actually the narrative was not created by Haitians. And so I was so grateful that I had remembered that we were once a global leader. For those of you who are familiar with the 1804 Haitian Revolution, we are the first independent Black nation of the world. And we proved what was possible. We proved what was possible when you fought for liberation, for freedom. And so I said, why not with education equity? And so I'm grateful that I am the co-founder and part of an incredible team that has launched CoIET, and that is proving what is possible.
Beautiful. So can you say a bit more about why you were so committed to this notion of contextualized vision kind of from the outset?
Sure. I think for us, we are living in a country and living in an environment where foreign intervention is the norm. We have had a history, literally since 1804, if you want to start far back from there, of foreign intervention that comes with an idea of what we need as a people, and that come with a solution that very often does not take the time, nor the will, to be honest, to understand what local context means, and that truly pushes for an understanding of our context and our culture and our customs and why they are what they are. And so I was really struck by the idea that we could and we should create a new narrative by putting Haitians in a position of leadership. And so from the very beginning, I said, yes, I was born in Haiti. Yes, I am a proud Haitian. Yes, our entire staff is local. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we all know our history, right? I think so often we assume that if we come from a particular environment, we know its history. And so I was really struck by the idea that we needed to do some digging, and we needed to take the time to do it well. That was one of the biggest things for me, is I took a slow and steady approach to launching CoIET because I wanted to make sure that this was not an imposed vision, that this was not my vision, but that I had people at the table contributing to a vision who often are not invited to speak. We have had parents, we've had students, we've had people who've said, I love education, I believe in quality for all, but I've never had a chance to actually speak up and share why there is a different vision for my child. And so I'm grateful that we were able to look inward to push forward.
And can you say a bit more about then how you went about that? Like, how did you go about defining that vision?
So in terms of the how, and this is where the pointer will come in handy, we have some photos to show a little bit about the how, but I'll just point to three things that I think are critical for the way that we went about this in Haiti. Number one, again, I'm just going to highlight two words that you're going to hear again and again. It's time and trust. So this took time. And I think so often we're such in a rush to check off the box of I'm in a community. Of course, there's a community center down the block, so that means I'm in the community. I actually think that's a bit superficial. And so we really pushed so that this took time. This took about 3 to 4 years. And that doesn't mean that it's too late, ever. But that just meant that we wanted to be intentional about taking the time to sit in church groups and to sit at community centers and sit in homes of parents who were maybe illiterate, but their child was in the school down the street and they had something to share with us about building this. The second word is trust. We wanted to make sure that we were credible, not just because we wanted to be seen as the right advocates to push for happiest, but because that we truly had the credibility to stand as a staff and recruit the right people and train the right people for these incredible children. And so that trust, the other thing I'll say about trust is that you can build trust, you can also lose trust. I think so many cases we're saying we're doing the right things and we have trust, let's go ahead. I think we try to be very intentional about making the right choices, celebrating as a community, and making sure that we didn't lose the trust we had built so carefully. So the three things I'll highlight about our process and the how is this is, again, a dynamic thing. It doesn't ever end. But number one is that we wanted to ask the question, what is Haiti at its best? Right, that reality doesn't currently exist, but if we take the time to actually paint a picture of Haiti at its best, one of the things that is so powerful for me is that we started looking back at Haiti in terms of the social movements, not just our revolution. There's actually other movements in Haiti that have been incredibly successful for our people. And so we wanted to understand what is Haiti at its best and what are the different trends and characteristics of those successful social movements that we could learn from. That was one. The other thing is that, again, going back to time, is that we started to identify some of the rural communities where the need is the greatest. And we took the time to go and identify community ambassadors in each of those communities. And so in each of our 4 rural placement communities where we currently are, we wanted to identify a student, a parent, a school director, a current teacher, and another community ambassador who might represent another sector, who would represent that community for us all throughout this process of building a contextualized vision. And so we wanted to identify those community ambassadors in each of these communities and sit with them and have them be our, not just our allies, but our advisors, our counselors, our critiquers. And one of the things that we quickly realized is that sometimes when you enter into these communities and you say, who is a good leader to help you with this process, somebody may point to somebody with a title or with somebody who has the microphone and stands and gives a great speech. But when you take the time to sit in some community forums, you start to look around the room and realize that it's not always the person with the mic. There might be somebody in the back of the room who's the one giving the nod of approval. And that's the person who you need to sit and speak with. What is that person's story and what is their vision for their community that they know so well? And at the same time, that doesn't preclude that you sit with the woman who sells bananas by the side of the road and get her opinion as well, because they're just as important. And so we took about 3 years building that into our process, and those people are still with us. They are the heart of our staff. Our staff are not the director of training only. They're the women who own the restaurants where we eat every day. And so all of those people are part of our communities and CoIET and this movement that we're building. And the third piece that I think was really process-oriented for us, but still very important, is the idea that we wanted to be able to understand exactly what the predicted reality for all of our children would be if they continued on the path that they were on, and then take the time to understand what is the alternate reality, right? If we have Haiti at its best as the North Star, what is that alternate reality that we can contribute to? Not myself, not our director of training, but also working in allyship with parents and students to all make that come together. Oh, and the photos. The photos, oh, yeah. Important, yes. And so I just wanted to highlight a couple of photos. I'll go through these quickly. This is, again, a representation of the fact that you might be coming from a country in a context but not know it well in terms of its history. So this is a photo of myself and members of our staff climbing the hill up to the Citadelle, which is the monument that exists and that is still the best-known fortress that represents a revolution in this country, in the world, really. And so this is us not just walking to get to the top and take a pretty photo, but speaking with the people who live there, right? And who have great-grandparents and great-great-great-grandparents who understood what it was like to fight for freedom. This is a photo of myself sitting among an incredible group of diaspora Haitian teachers. These are people who have taught for over 20 years and who still go back and forth. They're retired, yes, but these are people that still need to be part of our movement and tell us what it was like to teach in Haiti, come to the US, and still be connected to Haiti, because the Haitian diaspora is an incredible part of what I talk about when I say community and context. This is a photo of us having a community forum, right? When I say community forum, I don't mean 200, 300, 400 people, right? I mean sitting in a space that is local, that is approachable, that is inclusive, and making sure that everyone knows that they can come and be heard in the language that they speak. And for us, that's Haitian Creole, which is why we chose to name our organization in Haitian Creole, which is in itself unheard of, right? A lot of people expected us to speak in French. And so the fact that, one, it takes time to explain why we're named in our native language, and even the fact that we have to help people pronounce it, that time and the effort, it's worth it. This is a photo of a dominoes game. Don't be alarmed by the face of this young boy who's in the middle. Don't be alarmed. It's just part of the game. This is a photo that represents why it's so important to value what exists locally. Because we understood that for too long, schools are a universe in themselves, communities are a universe in themselves in Haiti, and us at CoIET, we're breaking down that wall, the barrier that exists between school and community. Because what we love as a people is the way that children are raised by their parents to appreciate folklore and Haitian proverbs and Haitian songs in Creole, right? To be proud of where they come from. Unfortunately, they walk into schools and are told that they have to speak in French only, and that we have a colonial past that should dictate what they do in the future. And so what we're doing at CoIET is breaking down that wall so that the way that kids are raised in their community is what they see in the classrooms. And so this is just an example of us literally observing this game in action and saying, what does this look like if this kind of activity took place when you're teaching math in a classroom? This is a photo of our incredible cohort members. Some of the men, don't worry, there are women as well, but this is a photo of the work that they're doing to actually renovate one of their school buildings. Because as part of our cohort experience, you have to finish what we call a professional portfolio of community projects, right? If you have a vision for what impact we do as a collective, you need to know what that looks like even during your 2 years. And so all of our cohort members are completing community projects alongside the current teachers and school directors of their schools, which is what's pictured here. And finally, I believe this is the last photo, which I love, is actually a photo of some of our cohort members teaching by the side of a local lake. And of course, in the circle is some of the students that they teach. This was so revolutionary because these students had never taken the few feet to walk across from where their school is to sit by the side of the lake, sort of like a field trip, but they had never been told that their lake is valuable. They had never been told that that lake is an asset to the community and that it was worthwhile to have a science lesson by the side of that lake. And what I loved about this moment, this was the last day of our summer immersion, as we call it in Haiti, is that those students were teaching our cohort members what it was like to live by the side of the lake, while the cohort members were teaching the students about environmental protection. So just a couple photos to illustrate what this has looked like for us in action.
So let's take a look at the vision that resulted from this whole process. I think we can put it up here, but you also have it on the pieces of paper that were on your chairs. It's the piece next to Nadine's photo. Let's just take a minute to let folks take a look. Nadine, I wonder what portion of this vision was a function of what you were bringing to this in terms of your own values and global knowledge, and what portion came from that process and like the deep understanding of local context.
If I were to pull out a few phrases, and I think very similar to what Jonathan was sharing, I think this idea of ensuring their basic needs are met, as well as a high quality education for their children and future generations, absolutely stemmed from a lot of the conversations we had with parents. And this idea of the bottom of being respected leaders in their communities on a path to being decision makers. And I have to highlight that because so often we're thinking about change as the individual in Haiti, right? A leader is one person who has the mic. And us at CoIET, because of the process we've taken with our communities, we've redefined that. We've redefined leadership and reimagined it to be as part of a collective. So for us, leadership is not one anymore. We talk about collective leadership in all that we do. And the other thing is that communities now are our unit of change. Instead of talking about one student succeeding or one teacher leader having incredible results, all of that is important, but we will not be successful if the community as a unit of change is not transformed. And then to answer your question more directly, I would say a lot of our process, I would say, is about 75% local and 25% global, because Haiti has not reached its ideal yet. And so I think I would be disingenuous to say that everything comes from the local context, because we have to pull from great practice and great solutions that have happened in similar contexts from around the world. And so about 75-25% mix has been our approach.
And what do you feel like you learned through this process that you might not have anticipated?
One, I would not have anticipated that for too long, the history of where you come from may not be what you know, right? And so I think you've heard me say that again and again. I have gone through an incredible learning journey. The fact that I mentioned that I studied the history of education in Haiti as an undergraduate, that was nice, right? That was important, but I still continue on that journey of understanding history so that our movement can be authentic and can be real to who we are as a people and where we deserve to be as a people. So that has been a huge learning for me. The other piece that you'll hear us say again and again at CoIET are the 3 C's of culture, customs, and community. I'll mention customs because you cannot create, for me, a vision that is national without taking into account regional differences, right? Just to put it in context, it's like saying Mississippi Delta is the same as Denver, Colorado. And so for us in Haiti, again, there can't be a single story in terms of contextualized vision. So the work that we've done on our team is that we've edited this for the 4 rural communities where we live, right, and where we work every single day. Because this needs to look a little bit different if you have a hospital in your backyard, as opposed to where you don't even know what it looks like to get past 6th grade, right? And so I think those are 2 different environments, and so we've created a slightly different contextualized vision according to the local contexts. And I think the only other piece that I would mention that I already alluded to is this idea that community can be a unit of change. I worry a little bit that some of the people who are graduating from our 2-year program are thinking about how they themselves can become the sole entrepreneur that changes the game, or the sole politician that then becomes president. We're actually thinking very differently about how collective vision and collective action exists from recruitment to selection to training, all the way through when an alumnus says, I want to band together with 2 or 3 other people to start a radio program about citizenship in my rural community. And the great news is that that's actually a real story. That offer was just made last week, where 3 of our alumni are on the path to starting a radio program in rural Mirabale about citizenship and educational equity.
Amazing. Last question for you, Nadine. So now that you, have, it sounds like, an evolving draft of a contextualized vision, how are you using that?
So we're using it, as I mentioned, in every single step, right, of our process. I was very nervous that this would become something that was plaqued on the wall or that was nice to share in an incredible venue like this. And so what we've done is that we have tailored our recruitment and selection questions to what's here on this vision statement. We are making sure that everything that we do is so intentional, because if this is only something that is written down, it's not going to be helpful. So for instance, we will have an interview question that specifically says, what does it look like for you to become an economic catalyst in your region, right? As somebody who's being interviewed for CoIET, what does it look like for them to be a leader, to be a change maker, to be an economic catalyst? And even another question, what do they feel about their local language, Haitian Creole, right? Were they surprised that we allowed all of our applications to be in the local language? You have a lot of candidates, right, who are a little bit thrown by that. And so it's interesting to be able to integrate some of the reality of this vision in our recruitment, selection, and training processes. And then when it comes to the training processes, we really are very intentional that we're not just training for training's sake, and that we're not trying to create teachers who are putting their children on a different academic path, but completely forgetting about the identity of the children who are in front of them. And so it's been really powerful to be able to use this to tailor our training sessions and our workshops and our coaching to the reality of the children.
Great. Thank you so much, Nadine. And now wisdom. I think we can move to the next slide. Wisdom is still in the classroom. He was one of the Suleiman Award winners and a teacher in Denver until pretty recently, and is now teaching at the African Leadership Academy. So Wisdom, by way of introduction, can you tell us a bit about what led you to join Teach for America, what you taught?
Yeah. You literally just restructured my brain, actually. And even some of the examples I want to share. Thank you for inspiring that. I think what led me to Teach for America is most definitely my story. One, I was born and raised in Togo, which is in West Africa. And when I was 9, I would say I experienced probably, at the time, the most violence to my consciousness when we immigrated to the United States. And that is a theme that I think shows up in my entire story and even my work today. It was in the United States that I actually experienced social misery, even though I grew up in what we call a third world country. It was in the United States that I became black. It was in the United States that I became a refugee. It was in the United States that I became, on top of that, an immigrant. It was in the United States that I actually became poor. And in the United States that I was othered in these very violent ways, systematically. And especially at such a young age, 9, which is an interesting part in your development. So that led to a lot of internalized pain, which also shows up throughout my narrative. And when I really tapped into my history and undid some of that pain, it really solidified this commitment to truth and justice. And I saw that reflected in Teach for America, which is why I showed up.
And can you share what led you to establish the vision that you did for your students?
Yep. I think I would say this story differently now than I would a year ago. Now I think what I would say is, first, it was the experiences from that first year of teaching. So I looped with my first year class into my second year class. So the first year I taught 7th grade pre-algebra, and then 8th grade I taught a literacy class, Socratic seminar. So I was with the same group of students and parents for 2 years. And in particular, I'll start with, So about 2 months into the school year, our 7th grade year, I was finding that I couldn't really connect with my students. I was teaching them math, and it was really hard to get stories beyond just the numbers. So we just did an empathy exercise, and I asked them to fill out something most people don't know about them. And their responses, I think, moved me and actually really determined the kind of teacher I became. And it was actually listening to those responses. So first I'll just read some of those. Sometimes my family struggles, but my mom, grandma always managed to put food on the table, buy me clothes, shoes, etc. Most of my family has gone to jail at least once. My cousin died when the cops had shot him, and I only seen him 2 times, and they shot him so many times they wouldn't give him a chance. About 3 years ago, my parents were deported. And that's just a few cards, but you can imagine reading about 120 of these. And really what they depicted was the social misery of their human condition. And listening to those stories and then seeing some of my own pain reflected in that absolutely determined the kind of teacher I became and the kind of teacher I still am today. And it was the experiences I had, one, failing miserably that entire first year, failing to address any of those things they brought up, failing to even teach my content accurately, and failing to ultimately humanize them in a system which dehumanized them, and seeking resources from the Institute for Teachers of Color Committed to Racial Justice, the African American Core Member Summit, my brilliant and loving MTLD, and multiple conversations with my instructional coach as well. Through that, and then also talking with parents, and thinking about 2 or 3 parents that actually really stick out. Parents who were so into what we were doing in class, they would call me every week just so we could debrief what we talked about in class. In this way that wasn't hokey, but just authentic. Talk to me about what's going on in class. She's coming home and saying really interesting things. I want to hear what you're talking about. once we articulated this vision statement, and I'll skip through this. All right. To become a conscious and empowered individual, and to use your educated voice to advocate for yourself, your family, and your gente, your people. Those are just words. Mind you, they're critically conscious words that are empowering and very affirming, but they're just words. And all it highlights is actually the intense process of listening that it took to get to those words. Because my first vision statement was entirely egocentric. My first vision statement was something along the lines of, I, with all my greatness, will instill in my students the power to begin with the end in mind, to achieve great things, and to score really well on that algebra test at the end of the year, which is great. It sounds great. It's cute. We get snaps for it. But it's not doing anything to actually address their misery. So once we articulated this vision, which came from decolonizing our minds and seeking real, rooted pedagogies and philosophies, the hard work began. Which I think gets to the last question of how did we actually get to transformative? How do we track that? What did it look like in a system not designed for that? And for this, I think of two things. First is qualitative, second is quantitative. So qualitatively, it was an almost, what's the word, obsessive? An obsessive level in, and it sounds like a bunch of buzzwords, but it's true, in aligning every single one of our actions to that vision and to an obsessive level. I mean, it was to the point where this chart, will I explain in a second, I was posting it after school hours in the stalls, in the bathroom stalls for the boys. And I would post every week different cartoons or even different narratives about oppression that were happening in the community. And that's just one tiny example. This is essentially the transformative resistance framework, and it's simple. There's 4 categories. If you understand the United States of America without understanding race and class, then I think the quote goes, you're someone in need of psychiatric treatment, actually, because it's deeply embedded in the narrative and the current present-day manifestations of our society. Once you understand that schooling was not designed to resist that. It was designed for the outcomes it's producing. So then when we see students resisting in the classroom, to me that's actually beautiful. It's unfortunate that currently they're suspended for it, and currently they lack the tools to do it in a way that's transformative and not self-defeating, but it's beautiful nonetheless. So first it was, how do we norm with students on this language? This is posted in the Refocus Corner. This is a lesson we actually devote time to, figuring out each one of these categories, what the behaviors look like. And then step 2, how do we actually teach this? And I think of one specific moment. It was, I guess I'll protect her identity. Her name is E. She's a student. At the beginning of the year, she was reactionary behavior. And she was reading about 3 grade levels below her peers. And typically, once she got academically frustrated, she would unleash and take that out. So this is the student who reacts violently or really loudly to a consequence. By the middle of the year or so, E had moved to self-defeating and transformative, never conformist. And the reason is, if you actually understand her story, her father is an OG. So basically, he's reached OG status in the gang, which means he was initiated when he was about 13, and he's been in the gang his whole life, to the point that now he's retired. And if you understand her perspective, all right, growing up as this is her father, this is what he taught her, these are some of the values that he instilled in her, some positive, some negative, you understand that actually, for better or for worse, she's been taught never to conform to the system. And she knows that internally. This is the type of student who, one day in the middle of the school day, she walked out of a classroom and she screamed, "I hate white people." And she's a 13-year-old black female student. And she screamed that at the top of her lungs, and she screamed it in response to a consequence. If you just understand that as a simple moment of frustration, you lose the deep pain that this really student is crying out for. And if you understand it from a perspective of her actual critical perspective on race relations in the United States, her critical perspective on the fact that about 95% of her teachers and administrators since she's entered the public school system have been white, and I actually have never looked like her. You understand that the majority of her experiences with discipline and authority have come from white bodies. And you understand that actually, if it was white bodies within this system that failed to educate her academically, then she's processed some of that pain and she's holding a whole category accountable. And currently, she doesn't have any tools to actually emote that beyond walking out of class and yelling, "I hate white people." And I think to me, ultimately, that's how I define teaching. And I'll borrow a quote from Cornel West, which I seem to be doing a lot these days. And he says, "It is the vocation of the intellectual to put social misery on the agenda of those in power." And what that looked like practically, especially once I started thinking out of my own egocentric mindset, we realized one classroom, actually in the long scheme of things, does not matter. If my whole grade level isn't on board, if the whole school isn't on board, if our parents aren't on board, if the community isn't on board, then what are we exactly doing? And it got to the point where we were actually organizing sessions with students, parents, teachers, administrators to actually sit down and talk about some of the complaints and constraints on this school design and talk about coming up with solutions. And then this is the moment when I think we learned our biggest lesson. And this is the moment where I think we all have to step up, is when we have those conversations, and we'll have many conversations, and yet those in power still choose to ignore the voices of the oppressed, the voices at the bottom. Then what do we choose to do? What you gonna do in that situation? What does resistance look like for you as a teacher? In my whole first year of teaching, I spent it mostly in the conformist category. And it wasn't until that second year where I really developed a sense of transformative resistance as an educator in the classroom, as a member of the community, the school community, and the larger community.
Thank you, Wisdom. I was going to ask one more question, but you've just covered so much ground, which is just, so you're pursuing this vision that emerges from your kind of deep understanding of really the circumstances of your kids, but you're teaching in a system, and I know this is what you were just kind of getting at, but that's oriented towards a much more limited set of outcomes. And I guess I wonder, practically speaking, sort of how did you do that? Like, how do you measure success? I mean, you've got a system with a certain measure of success, but then you're working towards something different. Like, how did you approach that?
Yep. And actually from day one, remember telling the students, in this classroom, you're actually going to have to do double the work. We're going to have to do the basic stuff, which is just the Common Core reading, writing, listening, and speaking standards, which means those basic lessons on vocabulary and actually improving your writing, the mechanics. That's actually the basic. That's a low expectation of education. In this classroom, you better be able to accomplish that and more. The second part you're going to have to do is raise your critical consciousness, your ability to read the word, which is Common Core and all that jazz, and read the world that you exist in. So you situate your life goals in your social reality, all right? And if we talk about moments of tension within the system which actually doesn't support that kind of thinking, I think about two things actually that have really highlighted that. One is when we fostered a sense of community. So I've now learned my strengths and weaknesses. One of my strengths is being able to get my students actually on board with a classroom vision that we come up with together. Great. But once again, that's just my egocentric predicament. One thing that happened, though, is as students were invested in seeing, wow, I'm actually showing up to this class. I love what we're talking about. I'm talking about it with my parents. I love it so much. I don't even realize I'm doing academic work. Then they actually do the work of taking on the vision themselves and getting everybody else on board. So when the principal sees a student who, on a Sunday, will, we give our phone numbers to students so they can call for homework help, will message an article that she read about Taylor Swift using cultural appropriation of black bodies in her music video. She sends that to her teacher at 3 in the afternoon on a Sunday. Something special is happening. That child is learning to love education again. That child is learning to love learning again. And when we're able to capture those moments and then engage in dialogue, honestly, there isn't this, I was talking to someone about this, I wish I had this sort of incredibly insightful, this is what you've been missing all along, but that's all it was dialogue. Especially if you're gonna stand up in the classroom and have your students chant things like Black power or brown power or feminism or talk about queer theory in the community, which sometimes some are educated about what that is, some aren't. You're gonna need dialogue. You cannot exist in your silo, which gets me to the last point of my greatest weakness in the classroom was constantly existing in a silo. Just 2 weeks ago, 2 of my former students emailed me and said, Mr. Muzu, can we have the lesson plan for that activity we did on socioeconomic class? We want to go back to the school and actually lead a workshop with some of the current 7th graders. That moment, to me, is ultimately, this is titled Redefining Student Success. To me, that moment is student success. It's, one, having the agency, and then the moral integrity to understand that you are implicated in this fight for education, to understand that it's not just about your individual's upward social mobility, but our collective mobilization in this way that's not hokey, it's not buzzwordy, but it's real and we're seeing it. And we need to capture that.
Wisdom, can you also briefly describe, we've put on these pieces of paper that everyone has your rubric that I think you use to kind of measure progress. Can you just so that people know what it is that they're looking at there? Do you know what I'm talking about? Transformative.
Oh, yes.
Oh, just
Beautiful
quickly,
picture.
because we're right on
Sure.
schedule. I mean, this is miraculous. We have actually pulled this off, but we want to stay on schedule.
Sure. I'll quickly go through the 4 categories.
Or even, actually, sorry to interrupt. Don't go through the 4 categories, but can you just say how you use that, just so that people know what it is, and just really fast, and then because I want to.
Yep. So once again, every single action. So whether it's a student misbehavior, whether it's an article we're reading in class and identifying moments of this, whether it's finding a local community leader who's demonstrating behaviors of transformative and conformist resistance, whether it's analyzing our own assistant principal, when do we see her having conformist resistance and transformative resistance, it was applied everywhere. Students taking a survey every 6 weeks, identifying different components of their behavior. It was me individually tracking each term and awarding, not just getting an A in class, which is the basic expectation, but moments where you're stepping above and beyond and actually showing that transformative resistance. So it shows up everywhere.
Perfect. So we wanted to now just pause for a moment and leave a couple or 3 minutes for you all to just reflect on your biggest thoughts, takeaways, questions, commitments to yourself that you would take just thus far from having listened to this. And then we're going to have time to just feed out. We want to hear what's most on your mind, whether it be a question, a thought, a takeaway, and then we'll have another few minutes for these folks' final reaction to what you share. Can we get a few folks to share out biggest thoughts, questions, takeaways? Oh, we've got some mics around the room, I hope. Yes.
Oh, thanks a lot. Well, I guess it's bigger than I thought. How you doing? I am curious about, I'm a first-year teacher in the Las Vegas Valley, and I'm curious about the balance between standards and educating for standards and educating for interpersonal and social success, educating the human. And I'm curious at what that means to you and bringing that into the classroom, because yes, at the end of the day, hopefully we're helping build adults who are going to be transformative leaders and be a part of a global community of, you know, successful individuals academically as well as interpersonally. But with the same token, we do need to hit our subjects and hit them well, and I'm curious at what that means to you.
Great. Let's surface, just several more thoughts. There's a bunch over here.
Hi. First of all, just thank you all so much for sharing. That was incredibly powerful. I work for a charity called Teach First. It's based in the UK. And I actually was going to ask a very similar question to what the lady just asked, so I'm going to pivot. And kind of connected to that, what I'm curious about is whether you feel that what is clearly so innate and deeply embedded in who you are as people, is that something that can be taught? Is the kind of the skill, the ability to balance the whole child along with kind of academic rigor and, you know, the pressure of wanting to conform to standards and assessments, and actually feeling that that's your job compared to the notion of the whole child and almost bringing their reality into your teaching as well. Is that something that teacher training could more effectively do? Or do you subscribe to the notion that teaching is ultimately a vocation and some people are called to it and some not?
I work in research and analysis, and I'm excited to be in this session, but was also bummed to miss the What Works session. And I'm seeing the crossover here, and if we're redefining what student success is, how do we define what works? How are we measuring and tracking and all of those things that TFA likes to do, and we like to celebrate schools that have high test scores? How will you show your outcomes and success with these alternative definitions of what student success is?
Okay, thanks. One last, and then we'll go forth.
Hi, my name is Nadia. Shout out Wisdom. We were at Tulsa Institute.
Tulsa?
Hey. Actually, I just want to say again, thank you all to the panelists, and thank you for introducing the transformative resistance framework. I've been looking for something to apply, like more strategically in our school and in our classroom. And so my question, I guess, is a little technical. So say I want to introduce or start introducing some of these concepts now, like sooner than later. I teach literature, 9th grade lit. And so my question is, you use the example of analyzing school leadership and student behaviors to think about who is actually being, like, resisting the conformity. And so my question is, like, as a lit teacher, would starting with texts and character analysis be too external and separate from the framework? Or would that be a good gateway to start introducing some of these concepts to kids?
Great, thank you all. I'm gonna just super quickly give you 3 ways of or for maybe continuing this discussion, and then I'm going to ask these folks to wrap us up with their final thoughts, reflections in reaction to anything we've heard thus far. So first of all, you have this piece of paper. It clearly is an attempt to provide helpful links and ways to learn more about these folks and this topic. If you get out your phones and go to www.withganas.org, this is an online site that's hosted by Stephen Farr, where kind of vision-oriented teachers all over the world and leaders are sharing their latest learnings and such. And you'll see in sort of one of the initial links, first of all, you'll find videos to examples, virtual visits to communities, classrooms, et cetera, that are doing this kind of work. It's a great resource. You'll also find an invitation to a session that's going to be on March 1st at noon, which is designed to be a follow-up to this section. You can tweet in your questions or email them in, your thoughts. We want to understand what's on your mind and then join into a discussion that sort of more fully explores the issues that we've surfaced here. And then finally, you should see a card about the 1,000 Student Leaders campaign that Teach for All has launched. I think as we have just further this discussion across our network about the importance of working towards a broader set of outcomes for kids and redefining student success. I think one theme that just constantly emerges is the notion that developing student leadership is just such an important piece of this. And we want to both foster that approach and learn a lot more about what it takes. And we hope that you'll engage in that. So with that, let me ask any of you all to start us off on wrap-up thoughts.
This has been incredible. My mind is just in so many different places, so please forgive incomplete thoughts. First thing is shameless plug. Rooted is hiring, so if you know anyone who might be interested, please check out rootedschool.org. The quick thing that is top of mind for me right now is we've gotten better as a country when it comes to acknowledging racial injustice, but we have a lot of work to do when it comes to realizing or helping people realize greater economic opportunity. Especially given the fact that it's such a critical piece of fixing what is broken in many of our students' lives. And so my challenge for all of us as we take this conversation further is to continuously just think about what are the ways in which our schools, our classrooms, our systems are structured in a way to not only address the sort of critical consciousness that Wisdom kind of touched upon in Eugene, but how are we helping students realize greater economic opportunity, especially the types of the students that many of us in this room work with? What are we doing in our structures that are helping that happen, and to what extent are the structures we're setting up actually damaging for that? And being willing to acknowledge what is broken and being willing to acknowledge how we might help our students prove a system that is oftentimes set against them wrong.
I think for me, again, so much gratitude, and I'm really grateful that this conversation continues across the network. I think the one thing that I would like to add and emphasize, because I just hold it so dear to the work that CoIET is doing in Haiti, is the idea of the asset-based lens. I hope all of you are familiar with the asset versus the deficit-based lens. But I think for us in Haiti, I think we're trying to take it a step further when we think about the assets of our communities and the cultures that exist. Because I think too often we are trying to create assets or create solutions as if they do not already exist. And I worry that we're not doing enough of the work to dig and understand why those assets are still so valuable, and they're coming from our students, and they're coming from our parents, and from our communities. But because they've been devalued over generations of oppression and racism and injustice, you're speaking with a parent who says Creole is not important anymore in Haiti because that's what they've been told. But if we are taking the time to understand the asset, and even using it as one person asks about measurement of success, what would it look like if we're measuring success and measuring the assets that are coming from the communities based on, again, speaking with the people who have never been told that what they have in their communities are the answer, so that we can look within to push forward.
I think to me the duality of all this is this simple story. This is the reality of what it means to be oppressed for me. Simultaneously, when I was 9, it was actually a police officer who showed me the way home when I was lost, walking back from a friend's house, when I was 9 years old. And then simultaneously, when I was 19 at university, it was a police officer that pulled over my brother, my cousin, and my other cousin and I, and brought us down to the pavement, frisked us, and handcuffed us because somebody 5 blocks away had robbed a pizza delivery guy. And to me, that's the reality. It's both and. You never really have the option of not seeing the brutality of it all. And why do I share that? I think, if you think about what will it take to actually, you said, train these types of teachers, or to, at the end of the day, get to our subjects. At the end of the day, if we actually embrace this idea of collective contextualized vision, the beauty of it for me is we simultaneously actually don't have to agree. We actually don't have to agree. When the oppressed are leading their own movement, we do this work with the urgency of now and not this hope that's deferred, this mythical hope, because we don't have an option. We understand that actually we face realities that affect us every single day, and we do this work with just a different urgency, a different sense of critique to it. So to me, I guess the question I would pose is, what truths do we have to tell ourselves about who we are in this work and what we're best contextualized to do? It sounds jargony, but I think that's the best way I can put it right now. Where are you best fit to make your impact?
Thank you, you guys. I'm really excited to see this approach kind of transform the work we do across the Teach for All network. And at Teach for All, we're as enthused about working with Teach for America around all this as we are all these other network partners. So we hope you'll seek us out and find ways to learn more. So thank you so much for coming.